Good morning and welcome to Stigma, from Stigma to Strength, keeping you and your mind well. This is a new series that Methuen Community Studios are doing. We're going to start with a series of 5 shows on mental health issues in Methuen. About 6 months ago, Methuen started a new task force, the Mental Health Task Force. Mm-hmm. And it consists of several people from different departments in the city: police, fire, health, recreation department, the senior citizens, school department. And I'm here with 3 people today, and we're going to start the series off with the show about hoarding. A lot of people have issues with hoarding, keeping things they don't want to get rid of, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves and what department they're from.
Yep. So my name is McCarty. I'm from the health department within the city.
My name is Sara Hatfield. I'm also from the health department. My
name is Dan Donahue. I'm a deputy chief on the fire department.
Okay, so are we going to start off with the slides, Sara?
Sure, yeah.
All right, so Sara, we're going to have some slides that Sara's going to introduce for us on some of the issues, and then I'll have a bunch of questions for them.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about one particular issue in mental health, particularly among older adults, but not necessarily restricted to them. And we're going to talk about what is hoarding disorder. Next slide, please. So hoarding disorder is a mental illness. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, we know that hoarding disorder is present when several criteria are met. So one is persistent difficulty discarding items, despite the actual perceived value. So for some people, a paperclip might be just as important as their birth certificate. The other qualifiers include difficulty with items that congest your active living space. So maybe you can't use your stove to cook dinner because you have so many items on it, or you can't wash your hands after you use the bathroom due to clutter. We also see a perceived need to save the items and distress associated with the inability to do so. We also see distress in social, occupational, or other important areas of life. In addition, for some situations, not all, we see excessive acquiring in addition to difficulty discarding, as well as poor insight. Clinically, what this means is that the individual might not recognize the extent or the severity of their situation. They might not see it for what the folks outside of them see it as, so it might be worse than they think it is. So what is Methuen doing to help? We're revamping our policies and procedures in the health department to make them more inclusive for the residents that we're serving. So we've been working with several departments, including fire, along with police and EMS, and we've been doing training for first responders. So typically the first responders are the face of the city. They're the ones who see the situation, they're the boots on the ground, and they have a lot of really important information that we want to make sure is relayed to other areas of the city. So we've trained successfully all of the firefighters and EMS professionals in the city, along with a portion of police so far, to talk about what they can do in a situation where they suspect hoarding to be present, best practices, and kind of what to do after the situation, who to refer to. In addition, we've been changing kind of how our department responds. So typically we've had code enforcement, health inspectors, they go out and issue some guidance on the property. We're kind of shifting perspectives now to take a more human services approach ever since the department was recently combined into the Department of Health, Human Services, and Inspections, all under one umbrella. Next slide, please. So the Clutter Image Rating Scale is a scale that's been validated by the International OCD Foundation. So what you're going to see on here is a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being the top left, 9 being the bottom right. On the 1, 2, 3s, we're maybe seeing a little bit of clutter, but nothing that's really congesting the active living space too much. 4, 5, 6 is really a warning zone, a danger zone. The clutter might be getting really out of hand. They might be having difficulty using those active living places like we've talked about. And then the 7, 8, 9 are the really, really severe situations. We do have some residents who, we've discovered in homes like this. As you can imagine, there are quite some health and safety concerns, which we'll touch on in a few minutes. So next slide, please.
So let me ask you a question first. Sure. On the other one. Slides 1, 2, and 3, is that like, I can't really see that far. Is that like just stacks of paper, like maybe bills and stuff like that you have to go through, mail and stuff?
Yeah,
okay.
So 1's going to be, a super tidy home. 2 and 3, we're looking at a little bit of clutter. And I'd also like to differentiate 2 terms that we use right now. 1 is hoarding and 1 is squalor. So what the picture kind of is a hard time conveying right now this is a hoarding situation. Hoarding typically refers to clutter in items. It could be, bowls, carpets, mattresses, things like that. And in some situations, we actually have squalor. So squalor refers to the cleanliness of the living environment. So we might, in often cases, there's rodent and pest issues. So we might be seeing, mice poop, things like that in the home. And squalor and hoarding can occur at the same time, or they can occur one separately. And so when we're looking at the 2, 3, 4 situation, oftentimes it'll be more of the items. Some of them could be sentimental. Some of them aren't. They're just regular items, things that were supposed to go in the trash but didn't.
So explain to me, maybe I just lost something in translation, but explain to me the difference between hoarding and squalor.
Yes. So hoarding is active congestion of your living spaces and distress associated with items. Squalor is more of a cleanliness issue, so we might see feces in the home, other bodily fluids, things like that. And squalor and hoarding can go hand in hand, or they can be one and the other.
Okay.
Typically, the difference will be in a hoarding situation, we're seeing stacks and stacks of clutter. Maybe it's pressed down onto the floor, so you have to walk over it to go into the home.
Okay.
Squalor is something that you're going to notice pretty soon when you walk into the home due to the smell and just the visual cleanliness of the home. We might smell something like ammonia, which we'll touch base on later, which is what happens when animal or human urine stays around for a while. So again, they could happen at the same time. Sometimes it's one or the other.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and so I'm zooming in right here on the 4, because 4 is really where we see the tipping point start to go. There might be so much clutter that you're walking over items, maybe you can't really see the floor. Something that we'll be talking about as well is how hoarding is a fire risk. So we're seeing on the right paperwork piled up. So these are all kind of health risks that present. And then we're going to go to the next slide, which is a 9. A 9 is pretty much, the most severe situation. It can be quite difficult for individuals in this situation due to a myriad of issues, and that's really the top of the scale for what we're looking at. So we're going to go to the next slide. And in addition to the new departmental policies and procedures and the interagency collaboration, another thing that Patrick and myself are doing is we've started a Buried in Treasures course. Buried in Treasures is kind of like a support group with a little bit of education on the side for people who are affected by hoarding disorder. Sometimes they come for themselves, sometimes they come in support of somebody else, but it's a 15-week course, an hour and a half a week. And we kind of bring together about 6 to 12 individuals, sometimes more, and just talk about the situations that they're in. Something that's really important to us is breaking the stigma on hoarding disorder. It's a very, very highly stigmatized mental illness, particularly due to the shame and the isolation that quite often occurs with it. So one of the things that we're working to do is kind of break that stigma by talking about it openly. Currently, we're in week 4. We're running one course at the Senior Center that's open to everybody, regardless of age. And then we also have one course that's being run at the Housing Authority, open to folks in public housing. So those are the 2 on the docket right now, and after this course ends, we'll be opening up registration as well. So we'll have contact information at the end of the slides, but if this is something that resonates to you, this is something that you think a loved one might be struggling with, we'd ask you to reach out to us. Of course, if it's an emergency situation, please reach out to 911 or go to your nearest hospital. But if there's somebody that you think of when hearing these slides, we'd love to talk to you about it more.
So I did go to, as you both know, I went to one of the courses, losing my voice. I went to one of the classes at the Housing Authority, and I wanted to, because of this show that we're doing, and I wanted to go just for some insight, and I found it very interesting. The people were very open, and at the one I went to, you asked them to bring in something that they treasured and will never get rid of. Mm-hmm. So I found that it was nice.
Yeah.
It was nice. It's a nice course. That book, Buried in Treasure, can people get that anywhere? Because I'm reading through it, and it's an interesting book.
Yeah. So it is actually available on Amazon.
Okay.
I believe it retails for between $30 and $40 on Amazon. If you join our class, you actually receive the book free of charge.
Right.
And there are other books out there by the same authors. If anybody wants to get any further information about hoarding, I would say that would be a very reliable source to go to.
Carolyn, can you bring that up again, that last slide that shows the book, please? This one here. it has a lot of tips and hints and different scenarios of different types of hoarding and squalor. So, but I haven't finished reading the rest of it, but I will, and I'll
Yeah.
get back to one of the classes because I liked it.
We'd love to have you. It's a wonderful resource, and can just reading about it and understanding that you're not alone in this situation, and there are other
Right.
people that are struggling with the same thing, I think can speak more than we can even say.
Yeah, there was one woman who brought this little clay piece that her nephew had made, and I just found that really interesting. She said she'd never get rid of it. It was her favorite nephew or whatever, but
It's interesting to
kind of hit the
explore.
heartstrings a little.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting to see too what has meaning to people, and
Right.
also how can we take that meaning that we might have in an object and bring that out of that object and more into the memory that we have with this person.
Right.
As a means of maybe decluttering some of the items that are very sentimental.
Yeah.
And so the other thing, in addition to Buried in Treasures, that we're offering right now is the first responders who have taken our program. We've collaborated with Fire quite frequently, and they'll let us know if there's somebody in the community where they might be at risk of hoarding, or they see that it's a hoarding situation. That's something that we're going to talk about next, so we can move on to the next slide.
So I just wanted to jump in and talk a little bit about how hoarding becomes a health and fire risk.
Right.
So as you can see on the slide, the picture is just an example of a home that obviously had a fire. But what are the things that we're looking for, we're worried about when a hoarding situation occurs? So the pests and rodents can carry disease. That is a very frequent thing. It's a very normal thing. Now, when they're living in your house routinely, mice and other rodents tend to have babies within your home, and they tend to get into all of your possessions and your food, and some things you can consume. So there is concerns about cross-contamination.
Right.
And so that affects your overall quality of living. Additionally, with hoarding, it takes its toll on a home. You're not keeping up with the quality of the home, so to speak, so it tends to degrade over time. So unstable housing structures can lead to collapse and fire hazards. Additionally, the just excess clutter in the home is a fire hazard in itself. If you went back to our clutter image rating scale, you saw that there were stacks of newspapers. And when you have stacks of paper, cardboard, anything like that to almost the ceiling, you have concerns of all it takes is a minor spark to set it up. Perfect, so back on the number 9 scale, you have a lot of things that are potentially flammable in a very tight space. So that's just asking for trouble. Never mind when you introduce space heaters, heating units that also are fire hazards or electrical hazards. So we'll go back to the main slide, yep. So additionally, exposures to ammonia from animal waste can cause tissue damage in the lungs. So that's why we mentioned the ammonia smell that can be common in houses that are infested with rodents or other animals. And there's also worry about vector-borne diseases. So you have Lyme disease, you have West Nile virus, or anything that mosquitoes may carry as well, because usually when there's rodents in the home, there's entry to the home that's not just through the door, so there could be structural concerns, holes in the walls, for example. So this is also a concern as we move into the spring, this time of year, when the bugs and the insects start coming out. These things can get into your home and also carry other potentially harmful diseases. So these are all the things we're looking at of the risks that come with hoarding from a health and fire standpoint, not just the mental health concerns that come with it. So next slide.
And so this is where our collaboration with the fire department really comes in hand. You might be wondering how we kind of become aware of these cases, which is something we'll get to in a moment. But I do want to turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about the firefighters' role in this and how we're making sure we're keeping their staff safe.
So hoarding is a big safety issue for us. It's hard enough. You go into a clean home, in a smoke situation where you can't see your hand in front of your face, it's hard enough to find your way around. You think about being in the darkest place you've ever been, and trying to find your way out. It's that's what it's like being in a fire. Now, if you put all the clutter, all the objects from the hoarding in there that you have to climb over. Sometimes we've had firefighters in homes where, as they're crawling through, debris is falling down on them. It really sets us up to maybe lose somebody. as well as, we're worried about the homeowner safety as well, right? I mean, because we're in this house searching for them, and we're just climbing over piles of debris. We may never find you, So we've been in places where the bed is stacked up with debris, So and they just have a little sliver of the bed to sleep on. So if you come around the one side of the bed, and you're feeling on the bed, it's covered with clothing and shoes and boxes, and you might just assume that nobody's in that bed, right? So for the homeowner's safety, it's a terrible thing. It's
and for your safety
and for
as
our
well.
safety, right? But working with the health department with this new program that Sara and Patrick set up, we are able to notify them immediately within the first couple of days that they were out in the fire station and introduced this program to us. I got online, I sent them 3 addresses, and they're already working with those people. It's already...
Oh, good.
Yeah. And there have been several addresses since then, but it's amazing how quickly this has helped us. It's really making a difference.
Do they get upset when you report them? You're not really reporting them, you're helping them. I mean, for their sake.
Yeah. Some people do get offended. Some people, it's their life, right? And there's a stigma that people are embarrassed, but also these are the things that are important to them.
Yeah, and this is why we wanted taking this show, like literally from stigma to strength. You're helping them, so I'm sure you go in and tell them, don't be embarrassed, and things like that.
It's a process. It takes, these two can tell you, it takes a while to gain their confidence, to gain their trust.
Their trust, of course.
And it makes sense, right?
Of course.
Who would want somebody coming to their home and saying that they think there's a problem? And I think the important thing from our perspective to note is that we're doing it because we're worried about their safety, and that's kind of our bottom line, is, risking somebody's being upset at us. It's more important to us that we make sure they're safe in their home, and God forbid something were to happen, that we're able to get our first responders in to take care of them. So
it's worth the risk.
It is.
Approaching them. But if you went into a house and you know that there was only one resident in the house and you've gotten them out safely, do you not go in there anymore? Just treat it from outside?
Depending on the conditions, right? And depending on the size of the fire. If it's a very small fire and we think we can put it out quickly, we will. If the fire has grown and it's severe hoarding, we're going to have to fight it from the outside, fight it defensively.
That's what I mean, right?
It's not worth
going in.
Right. It's not worth losing a firefighter.
No.
Another problem that people don't think of is, when you get those stacks of paper, newspapers and everything else, boxes, the minute we put a hose line on them, it's going to knock it all over, become a mess, but it also buries part of the fire, so we can't get to it, right? So that the fire just smolders or burns freely under piles of debris.
Yeah.
It makes our job so tough. It
That's
makes
frightening.
it so much harder.
That is frightening.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, I don't know what else to say to that.
And you'd be surprised how common of a problem this is. You can drive by somebody's house and you'd never know from the outside. The outside is perfectly manicured. And you go inside and you're like, this isn't the same house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, if we're speaking rough numbers, about 2.5% to 6% of a population suffers from some form of hoarding disorder or just increased clutter. So if you just take Methuen, I know it's a little bit more than 50,000, but 50,000 people, and you do 5% of that, you're looking at
a lot of people. 10%'s
5,000, so half of that, you have 2,500 people. So even if it's just 500 people that live in these conditions, which is 1%, I mean, it's very, there's a lot of individuals out there and that's the reason why we're running this program, is to try to identify them through first responders. We're not trying to get you in trouble. We're not trying to put stress on you, but we want to reach out and make sure things are okay. We want to see how we can help from a human services standpoint, not from an inspection standpoint.
And you want to make sure they're safe.
Correct. So,
They're safe.
and we are, at the end of the day, Sara and I's goal is to treat everybody with respect. We want to be aware that that is your home at the end of the day. And we're not going to impede in some manner where we just kick in the door and start
No,
making
of course
demands.
not.
No, it's
Yeah.
not like that. So for us, it's really important. What means the most to us is building trust, and we can be as patient as needed. We're more than happy making multiple outreach attempts so we can try to get the services that could benefit any resident. And sometimes it's not just the concern of clutter, but when we start speaking with them, there's a lot of services that people qualify for in general, especially the elderly population, that can benefit them greatly on just their overall quality of life. So getting access to food, home care workers who can actually come in and routinely help clean up some of the clutter so we can slowly get it to a more comfortable standard. We can get people we can help them get transportation. And so there's a lot of different resources out there that exist that our community health worker, Jasmine Nunez, does a great job at connecting individuals
she's awesome.
to. So we really want to work as a collaboration throughout different departments, especially with fire. We're not going to work in a silo. So we're trying to take a more team-oriented approach to this and see how we can come up with the best solutions for these individuals.
So do you find hoarding more in older people, younger people? What group?
Right. So in terms of the age demographic, I would say elderly or the 55. I know I'm going like elderly 60, 65 and up, but I would say 55 and older, sorry, is probably the prime population. And the reason why that is because, think about it, a lot of individuals live in the same home for many, many years. They have a life of collecting, a life of gathering items and resources and whatever it may be. So next thing you know, 10, 20, 30 years go by and you still have things from when you first moved in, and now you're acquiring more. And it's just a natural progression that happens, and sometimes people don't realize, they can always think, oh, I'll clean it up when I get around to it. But the truth is as you get older, it becomes physically harder to attack these cleaning goals and getting around to taking care of all this. So I would say it can happen from any age group. Hoarding tendencies start in a young age. We all suffer from very little forms of it, myself included, but it's how we manage it and how we deal with it. And then I would say what triggers it is any sort of trauma in someone's life. So loss of a loved one, financial hardship, going through maybe a divorce potentially, or losing family members in general, or even just living in extreme isolation can trigger this. So that's why we started this work, stemming from hoarding's been around forever. It's a mental illness. It's something that has just been around.
They have shows on it.
Exactly, and the shows, unfortunately, I feel like further that negative stigma.
Yeah.
They paint an ugly picture, so to speak, and it really isn't like that.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is, stemming from the pandemic, we've seen a ripple effect. A lot of individuals living in extreme isolation for 2-3 years. Well, I'm sure everyone remembers you go into the market and there was a toilet paper shortage, and people were, I don't want to use the word hoarding, but they were grabbing it like crazy. And so now you've been collecting for 2-3 years, and then now all of a sudden it's like it's okay to you kind of come out of your home, so to speak, but now you have all these items that have been building up in your home, and maybe you've been neglecting some of the infrastructure, some of the routine maintenance that needs to happen in the home, and things can spiral out of control fairly quickly. And so that's why Sara and I have been, that's what came about this work.
Right.
About a year ago is when we started putting all this together and getting things prepped. So that's just a little background on the work we're doing and why it's important that we're doing this work.
So just to kind of add a different answer to your question, from what I've seen, hoarding definitely seems to be the older generation. Squalor for the younger generation, from what I've seen, seems to be more associated with addiction issues, or certainly there are other mental health issues, but I think it's pretty common, with younger people living in squalor, that there is some type of addiction usually.
Yeah.
I would agree with Dan on that as well.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Do you think So I've watched the show Hoarders before, and I think some of it's a little dramatic, but there was one show where it like went from generation to generation. They were so used to living in it that now one of the children has, is a hoarder, has hoarding issues.
Yeah, I mean, those tendencies can definitely be hereditary in a way. I would say it's not like you're born with it, but it's more the environment you grow up in, like you're mentioning.
Right.
If you think about it, you live a certain way for 15, 20, 25 years,
Yeah.
maybe even 30 years if you're still living
You think that's how
with
you're
your
supposed to
family.
live.
That's normal to
Yeah.
you. That's just how things are.
Right.
And so it does, part of it is for us to educate a little bit without impeding too much or overstepping. We want to let the resident know that there's a better way to do all these things.
Right.
And so it definitely can have a genetic factor to it. A great example is people who lived through the Great Depression. Just about 100 years ago, they learned to really hold on to things because there was there was a time of scarcity.
My grandparents,
There was financial
yeah.
hardship, right? So I'm sure everyone has had relatives that has lived through this phase. And now, if you think about it, maybe the baby boomer generation or the individuals that were born in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they grew up with parents that had habits from the Great Depression, and maybe they learned that it would be really important to hold on to things longer than you really need to. And that goes in line with holding on to things for 10, 20, 30 years. Next thing you know, you're holding on to everything you've ever collected for an extended amount of time, and your home can only store so much. And so it's really important and that's part of the Buried in Treasures workshop, is we actually dive into when is it okay to let go of items, and we try to work with, that's why we do the show and tell activity you talked about, so we can identify why things are important to us, and then maybe there's some perceptions or perceived barriers that they come to realize that they don't need some of these items that they think they need. And so part of it is getting that education and getting them that realization. So it's really important.
I was talking to a girl who's going to be on the show tomorrow, and we were just talking about different things, and this show, she's doing another show, but we both lost our mothers. So my mother died in '98. I still have her mass cards.
Really?
Why? Why?
Right.
And I'm laughing, and my husband calls me a hoarder. He's like, why do you hold on to these things? I don't know, it's a piece of her, but it's a piece of paper.
Right.
Right.
It's a piece of paper, it's a card, it's not her. So, and I have his mother's too, so he's like.
Well, and that's actually something we talk about in class a lot, is that these behaviors that we're exhibiting, they aren't, morally wrong. There's nothing inherently bad about doing them, because if that's what you're finding some importance in, it makes sense, and we all do it. I think the question for us is, are we doing it so much that it's actively interfering with our ability to live our life the way we want to, and to function in our home with the home's intended functions? And so I think that that's something that people experience a great deal of challenge with, and something that's really important with that is knowing that almost everybody out here on this earth has something of sentimental importance to them that is physically and tangible. It's when we start seeing it really interfering with our lives that we start to think, how can we find some solutions to addressing this?
Right. Yeah, I can get rid of these. They're in my closet, not doing anything. Never looked at them until, back then I did, but.
Yeah.
So do you have more slides?
I believe we do.
All right.
So yes, so this is the end of our written slides. I know we have some questions that we want to discuss, but I just kind of want to reiterate, if this resonates with you, first of all, if it's an emergency, of course, dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room. But if you're not in an emergency, you're not in a crisis, and anything about this resonated with you, whether it's your own behavior or that of a loved one, we'd welcome you to reach out. Again, like we've tried to emphasize throughout this entire talk, is that you aren't going to be punished for reaching out. We're not trying to employ punitive actions. We are just trying to kind of open the door and get some resources in place. And I think one of the hardest things about this situation for us is that we often don't come across people until there is a fire, there is a slip and fall.
Right.
And so one of the greatest things we can do is prevent it before we get to that point. So that's why I would encourage people to reach out, give us a call, have a conversation. We'd love to have a chat with you over coffee. So I hope that folks feel welcome to do that.
So Patrick's number was up there.
Yes.
If they want to reach out to you,
Yep. So
they can just call.
Right. So that is my work cell phone. So that is not a landline number. So you can text it if you're comfortable texting. You can call me. My number is 978-857-1813. And so I will be the main contact, but however, I can always connect you with my colleague Sara or even our supervisor Kelly if it's something of greater concern. So,
And they can call you anonymously if they have.
Yep, if you're comfortable keeping it anonymous, I'm more than happy to just take the call and we can just have a conversation about what's going on or what type of information you're trying to acquire or how can we help. I always encourage people to reach out. If I don't answer, please leave a voicemail. So at least I know the nature of the call, and I'm more than happy to get back to you as well.
So I have a question for you, Dan, real quick.
Sure.
So if you go to an incident, maybe a small fire, and you find that the home has a hoarding situation, do you say something to them there, or you just, you know?
We handle the situation.
Right.
And depending on the level and depending on the time of day, okay? If it's, let's say that it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and I know that they're around, we'll have our dispatch contact them, and as long as we keep a truck on the scene, we can hold the scene and we're able to go in and out of the house. So what we'll do is we will contact somebody from the health department and ask one of them to come out and maybe
do what
they can start building
Yeah.
the relationship, while we're there. At night, should we talk about the flip cards now?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
We can jump into it.
Okay. So the 1 through 9, the scale of 1 through 9.
Right.
We keep a binder, for lack of a better word, on every truck with those 9 flip cards. On the back of it is a QR code. Okay, so I can take my phone, scan that QR code, and there's 6 questions. I think it's 6 questions that I fill out: address, which number on the card. I think it is. Is it a 3 on the scale? Is it an 8 on the scale? And I forward it to them, and they have all of that information. They know what they're walking into before.
Kidding.
Yeah, I can take a few pictures if the homeowner doesn't mind, so they know exactly what they're walking into. They know what resources they need to bring with them. This is a tremendous
Wow,
program.
that's really something. Don't go to my cellar.
Well, it's not meant to impede on the resident, but like Dan mentions, it's for our safety as well. So
Yeah, of course.
when we follow up and we want to make contact, if we're allowed inside the home, because some residents don't want us in the home, and that's
They're embarrassed.
right. Well, and so that's where the trust
yeah.
building comes in. But going to Dan's point, if they hold the scene, we can walk in, we can meet the resident, we can kind of. We're going to get into it in a second, but what we call safety day planning is we sort of assess the situation. Now, when it gets input through the survey system we have that collects the data, all it is, as Dan mentioned, they're basic questions, just name, address, and then the time of day they were at the scene, so we just know when it happened, and then the grading system. And this gives us not only just actual data to collect so we can start identifying what's going on, but it gives us a better picture of what we can do to be prepared. But also, when we can't show up on the scene and we have to show up separately, we're not always allowed inside the home. It's up to the homeowner if they want us inside. As soon as you let us in the door, it doesn't mean you're opening the can of worms, so to speak, to fines and whatnot, because Sara and I aren't inspectors, so we're not obligated.
They don't get fined, do they?
No, they don't. So that's a
okay.
perception, is they think they'll get in trouble if one of us come into the home to speak with them, and that's not our intention. We just want to have a conversation and meet them and figure out how we can help. And if we deem that no help is needed or the resident doesn't want help, well, then we leave, and that's that. Maybe we follow up in a week or two to see if they change their mind. So it's not, we're not trying to be harmful or impeding, but I think it's important for us to identify what's going on under the layer, so to speak. And so this is why we put forward this program. And
That's something. It helps you too. It's for your
absolutely.
safety.
It takes less than a minute for us to fill out the form, and it helps. I mean, a lot of these addresses are calling us repeatedly, right?
Because of different issues.
Whether it's medical issues or psychological issues, so a lot of these addresses we're going to constantly. So if they can come in and identify what type of help these residents need, it takes some of the burden off us, and it gets them the proper help. We're kind of just putting a Band-Aid on things by responding, dropping them off at the hospital doesn't have the kind of services that they need, so they send them back home, and it's just a cycle, right?
Yeah.
So by involving the health department, could actually be, I don't want to say a cure, but
No, I get it,
you know,
yeah.
it's much more helpful.
Yeah. So I want to get to these questions before we run out of time. But before we do, we're going to take a quick 2-minute break. All right, and we'll be back in a minute or two.
When stress shows up, it can be hard to see. Maybe you can't sleep, or you feel sad and you don't know why. Or maybe it's worse, because stress can knock you down. It can hurt your health and your relationships. If you've lost a job, worry about your next meal, or have trouble making it through the day, we can help. Text STRESS to 211-211 to find a solution.
The innocence of youth. Is there anything any better? But soon they'll be in high school and facing all the same challenges you faced. How to make friends, how to fit in, how to be cool. We want our children to have everything they'll need to live fulfilling and productive lives. Make sure the kids in your family are among the more than 230,000 participants here in Massachusetts who take part in high school sports.
Welcome back to From Stigma to Strength. And we are going to restart again with some questions for these fine panelists. Oh, you're panelists now. So my first question for anybody, what are the immediate things somebody can do if yourself or a loved one is living in a household with clutter, whether it be hoarding or...
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you can do if it's not an emergency situation, please contact the health department just to get additional information on kind of resources, and also you can talk to us to explain the situation, and then we can advise, you know, how you should follow up or act accordingly. Again, there's no one straight answer. That's why I think it's best to just contact us
Right.
directly if you have any questions, because every household is unique, every individual is different, so
Right.
it's hard to just say do X, Y, and Z and that'll fix everything. What I can say though is from a health and safety perspective, we like to look at a few things in the home when we first come in. So this is something we kind of learned from our code enforcement team, is we want to make sure we have at least 3-foot wide pathways through the home. So this is kind of a checklist you can do for yourself if you're curious. 3-foot wide pathways through your home, and this is for obvious reasons of needing the space to move accordingly, and also if you have to get a stretcher or any sort of devices into the home that require more space. So 3-foot wide pathways. We want to make sure all egresses are cleared. So what's an egress? It's a form of entry or exit. So your doors, your windows, you want to make sure you can access to them. Additionally, it's advised if you're using a lot of space heaters on electrical cords or on extension cords, they are potentially fire hazards, especially in a home of clutter. So you want to make sure that all your utilities are working properly. So you have access to your heat, you have access to hot water, your electricity's fine, you're not having any sort of outlet issues. Additionally, you want to make sure you have your running water, and so your basic utilities. Additionally, one other thing is incredibly important, which falls into the fire category, is you want to make sure your CO2 and fire alarms are working well. So your detectors, make sure the batteries are new in them, or if they're hardwired, make sure they're connected. And it's really important that those work properly. In the case of an emergency or of a fire, you're alerted, so you're not, sleeping through in the middle of the night, and God forbid something was to happen.
Yeah.
So those are kind of from our health point of view, our sort of checklist, things you should look out for. But if you have additional questions, our contact information was put up, so you can always give me a call as well.
So the loved one can contact you and say,
Yes,
look, my
yep.
sister Jane has an issue, and I've talked to her, and she's very stubborn. She won't listen to anyone. She won't let us throw anything away from her. They can call you for advice,
Yeah, they can call
information.
us for advice,
Yeah.
or maybe we can try to set up a time to potentially meet the individual if they're willing to at least just have a face-to-face meeting. Sometimes it's easier to have conversation when you're standing there with them face-to-face. Over the phone, it's a little anonymous, kind of feels, you don't want to give much information. So I'm more than happy to take the ride and come to your home or meet you at a neutral place. So sometimes we'll do at a coffee shop, at
Right.
the senior center, so it's more comfortable, and then we can just have a conversation. I think that's that's the starting point from our work, is we have to build trust before we even start telling you how you should try to live your life.
Oh, of course, yeah.
We want you to feel comfortable around us.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Guys
You
or
covered
girls?
it.
All right, this would be for you. What sort of health risk can come with living in a home filled with clutter or the presence of pests?
We touched base on this with the slides, but additionally, one big thing that stands out is, and a lot of people overlook it, is if you have pests in your home and if there's an ammonia type of smell, one is if you live in it, you get used to it. So you don't necessarily realize it until someone
Yeah.
else says something about it. But that smell is actually has an effect on your health.
Yeah.
So inhaling that around the clock, 24/7, can lead to chronic asthma, maybe even COPD or other just illnesses, respiratory illnesses. Additionally, increased clutter in the home can also be an issue in terms of airflow. You might not get proper airflow into the house. So you have a lot of stale sitting air, which is, again, not great for your respiratory.
Right.
And also, a lot of individuals who live in homes with clutters, homes filled with clutter tend to live in isolation. So they're in their home a lot.
Yeah.
It's not like they're just there to sleep. Additionally, there's the risk of fire. So that is a huge health and safety concern. And then most importantly, just the general diseases that pests can carry. We talked about this earlier, and especially with vector-borne diseases as we get into the spring and summertime. Those are all your mosquito and insect diseases that are carried. So those are kind of the biggest concerns or things to look out for. One other big point too.
I'm starting to itch when you say bugs.
You get a little,
so sorry.
a little itchy feeling. But the other important thing too is if you have any plumbing concerns in the home or any water damage in the home, you also carry the risk of mildew and molds, which is detrimental to your health. So these are all reasons why it's important to kind of stay on top of your clutter, so to speak. But these are also things to just know about in general. If you or a loved one is living in a home filled with clutter, these are real concerns.
And in addition to having the 3-foot pathway for first responders, it can also be a trip and fall hazard for anybody.
yeah.
If you're walking in, ground that isn't steady, that's got items on top of it, you're standing, trying to find your pathway for them, you could trip and fall and need a lift assist from, the fire department or EMS. And then that also brings us back to then they might not be able to get in because the hallways are so narrow. So it kind of, everything has a ripple effect with everything else.
Yeah.
And just an example of that, 2 weeks ago, we went on a medical call. Elderly woman lived in a bedroom in her daughter's house. The house wasn't too bad, but the ambulance crew tried to get in the bedroom. Woman was on the floor, and they had to have the 2 police officers that were on scene step out of the bedroom so they could get in the bedroom. There wasn't enough room, to have 4 people standing in the bedroom. There was just the narrow little path that she was laying in. One person could stand at her head, one person could stand at her feet. That was
wow.
it in the entire bedroom.
But
So-
not the rest of the house. It was
No,
just
the rest of the house had some clutter, but
Not
the
the bedroom?
The bedroom was really, really a mess. Yep.
that QR code is something else.
It really is.
Good for you.
It's tremendous.
Yeah. Who came up with that, Sarah?
So we actually modeled it after a nearby town. So we're a part of the Greater Lowell Hoarding Resource Network.
Right.
It's based out of the Chelmsford Senior Center. So several members of their team, including April Hunt, who runs the Hoarding Resource Network, have modeled it in Chelmsford, and it's gone quite well. I think the interesting thing about hoarding, clutter, acquiring is that even though it's not a new phenomenon, we don't have a lot of understanding of where it comes from, what causes it. There just isn't enough data and research out there, and so that's why it's so important to us that we do gather this data now, so we can get a comprehensive idea of what really is going on. But so it's been modeled after a town nearby who has had a lot of success with the program.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so we're just really grateful to them for giving us the idea to get started.
So jumping on that, is that data saved anywhere?
So it's password protected.
Right.
It goes in our locked desk drawer or on our
No,
online.
I mean the data that Dan pulls up, he pulls up whatever, blah, 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 123 Main Street, and has whatever you have to put in. So, and he sends it to you.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yes,
right?
we
Is
have it
that-
saved
do you
in
have like
several
a-
systems.
A
Yeah.
log of like all these that,
We do. We have it in a password-protected file on our computer. And
Right.
the interesting thing, too, is that not only do we have it in sort of a database on our end,
that's what I meant, yeah.
we also have it in Fire's dispatch system. So if we go into a home and we find that the resident is only using the living room downstairs to live, you know, they spend their time eating there, sleeping, all of those things, and there's a clutter situation, well, if Fire goes in and they're trying to find somebody in a clutter situation, it really helps to know what room they sleep in. So it actually comes up on their dispatch system where the resident might be. It might flash Patrick's phone number to call if we have a history with the individual. So it's kind of rooted in on both our system and their end as well.
So it's safety for you and the person,
Absolutely.
the resident.
Yeah, it's going to save a lot of time on our end.
That's
You know, if
great.
we have, instead of having to search the whole house,
Yeah.
this is the room that person's going to be
I'll
in.
be in my living room, but it's not cluttered, so just with toys, but that's about it. So what is Safety Day? And what systems does the city have in place to support people in hoarding situations?
Right. You want me-
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll start it.
toss
and
a
maybe-
coin.
I think Sarah will probably fill in the gaps. I might miss a thing. But so Safety Day is our version of doing our day one assessment when we meet the person. So when we meet the resident, there's a sort of a checklist that we work through. So we look at what resources exist and what resources the person has already taken advantage of. So for a lot of individuals, I mean, it depends on your income, depends on your age. There's a lot of different factors in terms of benefiting from what resources are available. So for example, if it's an elderly resident, we try to see if they're already connected. It's formerly known as Elder Protective Services, but it's known as HBAN now.
HBAN, yep.
So we just check to see if they've ever made contact with HBAN or if they have an existing case manager, because it can be really important to have a case manager involved through HBAN, because then they're keeping an eye on the resident to make sure they're living in a pretty safe, healthy standard routinely. So we check for that. And then we also check to see how we can benefit them in other ways. So before we even get into the hoarding, we start looking at, okay, do you have adequate food in your home? As we mentioned with utilities, is everything running properly? If not, like what can we do to fix that? We might not be able to help directly, but maybe we can come up with a game plan for the resident, and we can help make the calls or do whatever we need to do on our end. Additionally, if the person doesn't have a vehicle, we make sure there's some sort of transportation. So what do they do to get around if they have to run errands? How do they do that? And then additionally, after we look at all kind of the resources and establish a baseline of what's available and what we can take advantage of, now we start to look at the home itself. So we start to look in different rooms just to see, sort of evaluate the level of clutter in the home. We have an honest conversation with the resident if they're willing to have it, as to how did we get here, what have we been doing about it, does the resident seem or deem it to be an issue for them, or do they not see the problem in front of them? So everything's unique. Every case is different. And then this is where we can really help Fire is, we were just talking about it, is we start to establish what rooms are used frequently and what are the main entrances to the home. So that way we can collect that data and relay it to Fire so they can have it in their dispatch. So if this is a new address per se, even if it's an existing address, it might be nice to know for the crew that's responding where they need to go to act quickly. So we find out where they live within the house, like where they're sleeping, where do they spend their time if it's just leisure activity, and then does anyone else live in the home? So it's sort of a baseline assessment. I hope I covered all the points. I'm
Yeah.
sure Sarah might jump in and correct me.
Well, the only thing I'll add is that I think from our end, the beauty of our position within the city is that, like Patrick mentioned, we're not code enforcement officers. On the other hand, we're also not mental health professionals. So we kind of live in this gray area that gives us the opportunity to sort of connect residents to care. You know, we're not the ones that we're going to be connected to long term, but we kind of serve as that connector to get them mental health resources, get them food, get them health insurance, all of those things, and kind of look at the resources on the table and put them in the right buckets. So I think that's the really cool thing about our position.
So this would go from, just a scenario, police or fire, then they would contact you, and you would get them the resources they need, whether it be mental health care and all those.
Yeah,
That's
so
pretty cool.
in a perfect world,
Yeah.
yes. So it starts with first responders or other agencies that come across this
Right.
case. So we do want to eventually reach out to age span in general just to get a feel, like
Yeah,
this is
if
something
it's
in
an
the
elderly
future,
person.
right?
Yeah.
But so yeah, it starts with police and fire. The call gets made to us,
Yeah.
and then now because historically there was no proper way to collect data with this sort of survey system we're using
Yeah.
with the cards. Historically, it was you made a call to whoever could show up, and then they show up, and then sometimes it wasn't just one person responding to the call from our department. It'd be like different inspectors or different individuals. So now you have people that kind of hold their own cases, and things aren't being put together, and then you lose track of these cases, or there's lost to follow up. So we're changing the way that is. So once it comes to us, we make our outreach, and sometimes just to get the trust of an individual, it can be one visit, it can be 6 months. It takes time. So. But that's ultimately, we get them the resources they need, and we begin working with them on a routinely basis where we're seeing them and being a friendly face to just check in on them, make sure everything's good.
And Nance,
Go ahead.
we, we keep saying health department, police, and fire,
Yeah.
but that's the nice thing about this mental health task force is, there are so many different groups from the city that are involved, the senior
Right.
center, the schools.
Everyone.
And we're finally all communicating.
Which is
right?
wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not any one department is kind of out on their own. We're communicating, and I think we're able to be a lot more successful.
I'm
right?
thrilled at that. And we're really grateful that you all decided to do this with us. I mean, we're so, kind of giddy about it, but I mean, we're weird, can I say? But we're so, people need to know that this task force exists, what parts there are in this task force. I mean, how many different, wheels that make the bus go around, if I could use that. But jumping on, you should have brought that QR book in. I would have loved to have seen it. I'm such a dork. But anyways, now touching on this, when fire department goes into a house, and how does it affect you? Like, how does it affect your firefighters when they go to a scene like this or any traumatic scene? I mean, you don't have to get like real deep into it, but just like how, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so basically you're talking about firefighters' mental health.
How does it affect them?
Everyone reacts differently.
Right.
What affects me may not affect Sara, and
Yeah.
it might affect Patrick differently. For me, it happens to be calls that involve children.
Of
right?
course, yeah.
So when I first got on the department, the way that we dealt with mental health issues was if we went to a really traumatic call, as soon as we get off work, it was, come on, kid, we're going to the bar and you're going to forget all about this.
Yeah.
And that was how we handled things for a long time.
Yeah, not anymore.
Right, not anymore.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
The same with the police, too. They'll,
Exactly, right? There's no longer that stigma, about these things affecting you, right? It was always suck it up, kid. Come on. But now it's okay to talk about it. So just from my department alone, 4 of us, myself and 3 other firefighters, have been through CISM training, critical incident stress management training. And anytime we have an event, that a serious event, whether it's a very tragic accident or involves a child, maybe a I don't know, sudden infant death syndrome, something like that.
Yeah.
Immediately, whoever responded on that call goes out of service.
right.
And we'll sit and we'll talk.
Yes.
And it's not mandatory. Maybe there were 6 of us on the call, and if you want to talk, you can talk, but we're all given an opportunity. And typically, I will start if I'm leading the class. I will start, and I will talk about maybe a call that I've been on, how it affected me, and then all right, so let's, does anybody have anything to add? And it's surprising how willing firefighters are to open up.
To each other.
To each other.
To each other.
To each other. You know, I'll be honest, I was always, kind of that guy, I can handle this and stuff it in the box,
Yeah.
right? And then
That box became full.
that box became full, and and something triggered it just over a year ago, and I decided that maybe I should talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's kids with me. I would
It's
wake
kids
up
with everyone, yeah.
Yeah. I would wake up in a cold sweat at
Yeah.
night. So anyway. So we
Yeah.
have firefighters that have gotten some training and are willing to sit down. If it's affecting somebody beyond that, there are 20 regional teams across the state, CISM teams. We are part of the Greater Lowell CISM team, which will send in clinicians. They'll send in firefighters, police officers, veterans, depending on the situation, whatever we need. They'll come in and they'll do a complete debriefing. Once it goes beyond that, if somebody's still having issues, there's a place down in, I believe it's in Gardner. It's down off of Route 2 in the Gardner area, called the On-Site Academy. And it's an actual working farm, and it is for first responders, and they will take veterans in, and it's for mental health.
Decompress?
You
Yeah.
can go in, you can stay for a week, or maybe you just go, for meetings once a week, for an hour-long meeting or something. And they have clinical psychologists, and it's kind of funny. The gentleman who founded this was a firefighter. His name is Hayden, and if you could picture Santa, right, in the off-season working on a farm, that's kind of what this guy reminds me
cool.
of. He just has that, that wholesome, that very laid back,
Yeah.
kind of, unassuming. It's refreshing, and you can go out and you can pat the donkeys, and it's really a neat thing.
That's
right?
cool.
Lot
So
of-
I have to cut you off because I just got the 1-minute warning and I'm going to get in trouble. Thank you very much for joining us. We so appreciate it very much for doing this show. And thank you again for joining us on From Stigma to Strength. I'm your host, Nancy Reardon, and see you next time on our next show. And have a good day. And remember, it's okay not to be okay.